beginning of your teenage years. You know, your friends are the most important. I did not want to hear we were going to Wiesbaden, Germany.
She was 14 years old. Let that land for a second. Not 15, not 16, 14, a ninth grader, a girl who still had homework, still had a curfew, still had a childhood that hadn't finished happening yet. And Elvis Presley, 24 years old, globally famous, one of the most powerful men in the entertainment industry, walked into a room in Bad Nauheim, Germany, looked at her, and decided he wanted her. Not admired her from across the room, not thought she was cute and moved on, decided, pursued, acted. That distinction matters more than anything else you'll hear in this video. Because what happened next isn't a love story. It's a masterclass in how predatory behavior gets repackaged as romance when the man doing it is famous enough, charming enough, and powerful enough to rewrite the narrative in real time. So let's go back to 1959. Elvis had been drafted into the US Army, reluctantly, publicly photographed at every step of the process. He was stationed in Bad Nauheim, a small town in West Germany. And even in the army, even thousands of miles from Memphis, he was still Elvis, still surrounded by a rotating crowd of admirers, hangers-on, yes men, and women who wanted to be near him. He was living off base in a rented house with his father, Vernon, and some of the Memphis Mafia. And it was at a party, the kind of gathering that happened regularly in his orbit, where he first saw Priscilla Beaulieu. She was there with her stepfather, Captain Joseph Beaulieu, an Air Force officer. She was quiet. She was poised for her age, and by multiple accounts, she was breathtakingly beautiful in the way that only a certain kind of innocence looks beautiful, unguarded, unaware of itself, completely authentic. Elvis was not unaware of it, not even a little. He asked someone to introduce them. He found out her age, 14, and here is the moment where any adult with appropriate boundaries walks away. Here is the moment where a responsible man says, "She's a child, this isn't appropriate, I'll leave her alone." Here is the moment that never came. Instead, Elvis turned on everything he had. The charm, the attention, the full, focused, devastating warmth of being the most magnetic person in any room he walked into. He talked to her for hours. He played piano for her. He made her feel, and this is the key, this is the thing that gets replicated in every grooming dynamic, whether the man is famous or not. He made her feel like she was the only person in the world who truly understood him. That is not an accident, that is a technique. Priscilla has described that first night in her own memoir. She described feeling overwhelmed, almost dizzy, completely swept up in him. Of course she did. She was 14. He was 24, experienced, charismatic, and one of the most famous human beings on the planet. The power imbalance wasn't just significant, it was total. But here's where the story gets more calculated than most people realize. Elvis didn't just charm Priscilla, he charmed her parents. He specifically requested that Captain Beaulieu allow Priscilla to visit him again. He sat with her family. He presented himself as respectful, gentlemanly, almost wholesome. He gave them the version of Elvis that military families could feel comfortable with, not the hip-shaking, controversial rock and roller, but the polite Southern boy who called adults sir and ma'am, and seemed genuinely fond of their daughter in a protective, almost paternal way. And it worked. Her parents said yes to more visits. They said yes to a relationship they should have shut down before it started, because Elvis had specifically, deliberately, strategically presented himself as safe. Think about the sophistication that requires. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't a man blindly following attraction without thinking. This was a man who understood the obstacle between him and what he wanted, which was her parents' trust, and systematically dismantled that obstacle. He identified the gatekeepers. He neutralized them. He got access. That's not romance, that's architecture. And once he had access, the relationship deepened on his terms, at his pace, by his design. They saw each other regularly during the rest of his time in Germany. He wrote to her, he called. He maintained the connection with careful, consistent attention. And by the time Elvis was discharged from the army in 1960 and returned to the United States, Priscilla Beaulieu, still a teenager, still in high school, was already emotionally anchored to him in a way that would take years and years to fully understand. Here's what grooming actually looks like, because it's important to name it clearly. It doesn't look like a villain. It doesn't look like force or threats or anything you can point to and say, that's obviously wrong. Grooming looks like attention. It looks like being chosen. It looks like a powerful person seeing something special in you that nobody else has seen. It looks like feeling more mature than your age, more understood than you've ever been, more significant than your ordinary teenage life ever made you feel. It feels like love. That's what makes it so devastating. That's what makes it so effective. And that's what makes it so hard, decades later, to look back and call it what it was, because the person living through it didn't experience it as harm. They experienced it as the greatest thing that had ever happened to them. Priscilla was not rescued. She was not protected. She was not guided toward a relationship built on equal footing and mutual choice. She was selected. She was pursued. Her parents were managed. And then over the next 7 years, she was slowly, methodically, almost invisibly remade into something that served Elvis's needs more than it served her own humanity. And the whole world watched. And the whole world called it beautiful. The visits became longer. The calls became daily. The emotional dependency deepened in one direction. And Elvis, back in Memphis, back in Graceland, back in the machinery of his own fame, Elvis had a plan. Not a plan he announced. Not a plan anyone would have recognized as a plan at the time. But a plan nonetheless. He wasn't falling in love with Priscilla Beaulieu. He was building her. And what he built, and what it cost her, is darker than any tabloid headline has ever been brave enough to say out loud. There's a version of this story that gets told at dinner parties and in documentary voiceovers and in the breathless pages of celebrity biographies. It goes like this. Elvis brought Priscilla to Graceland because he loved her, because he couldn't bear to be without her, because beneath all the fame and the chaos and the sequined jumpsuits, he was just a man who found his person and wanted to keep her close. That version is a lie, and not even a sophisticated one. It just requires you to not look too closely at the details. So let's look closely. By 1963, Elvis had convinced Captain Beaulieu to allow Priscilla, now 17, to move to Memphis. Permanently. The agreement, as far as her family understood it, was that she would live with Elvis's father Vernon, attend a local Catholic school, finish her education, and be treated with complete respect. That's what her parents were told. What actually happened was something else entirely. Priscilla moved into Graceland, not Vernon's house. Graceland, Elvis's house. The house where he lived, where he slept, where he ruled over a rotating court of friends and employees who owed him everything and questioned him nothing. And from the moment she arrived, the remaking began. It started with her appearance. Elvis didn't like how Priscilla looked. Not because she wasn't beautiful, she was stunning, by every account, naturally and effortlessly. He didn't like how she looked because how she looked was hers. It belonged to her. And Elvis had a deep, persistent, almost compulsive need for the things around him to reflect him rather than exist independently of him. So he changed her. He asked her to dye her hair, jet black, the same shade as his own, famously artificial color. She complied. He asked her to wear heavier makeup. Dramatic eyes, bold looks, a style that aged her, that made her look less like a teenage girl and more like a projection of someone else's fantasy. She complied. He dictated her wardrobe. He monitored her weight. He gave specific, detailed instructions about how she should present herself in public, what she should wear on certain occasions, how she should carry herself when she walked into a room with him. She was 17, she complied. And here's the thing about compliance in that environment. It doesn't feel like surrender when you're inside it. It feels like love. It feels like someone caring so much about you that they want to be involved in every detail of your life. It feels like being cherished. That reframe, the one that turns control into devotion, is one of the oldest and most effective tools in the psychological toolkit of manipulation. And Elvis used it with the ease of someone who had never once been told no by anyone around him. Because nobody around him was going to tell him no. That was the second layer of what Graceland actually was for Priscilla. Think about her geography for a moment. She was 17 years old, living in a mansion in Memphis, Tennessee. Her parents were on military bases, distant, unavailable, fundamentally trusting that Elvis's people were honoring the agreement. Her friends from Germany, from her previous life, from the person she'd been before Elvis found her, they were gone. There was no one at Graceland who was Priscilla's person, no one who had known her before. No one whose loyalty was to her rather than to Elvis. The Memphis Mafia surrounded her. These were Elvis's guys, his cousins, his childhood friends, his employees. Men who loved Elvis, who protected Elvis, who would have done anything for Elvis. They were not unkind to Priscilla. Many of them genuinely liked her, but their allegiance was never in question. If Elvis wanted something, they facilitated it. If Elvis said something, they agreed with it. And if Priscilla had ever raised a concern, had ever pushed back, had ever said, "This doesn't feel right," the audience she was performing that complaint to was entirely made up of people who worked for the man she was complaining about. She was isolated, completely structurally, architecturally isolated, not by locked doors, by design. And into that isolation, Elvis poured his vision of who she should be. She wasn't allowed to take the acting classes she wanted. He discouraged it, or more precisely, he made his discouragement so weighty, so emotionally loaded, that acting on her own desires felt like betrayal. She wasn't supposed to have ambitions that existed outside of him. Ambition meant independence. Independence meant she might leave, and Elvis could not tolerate the possibility of losing something he had worked so hard to build. Because that's what Priscilla was to him by this point. Not a partner, not an equal, a project, a creation, something he had spotted in raw form, acquired, and was in the process of refining into exactly the thing he wanted it to be. And what did he want it to be? A reflection, a mirror, a woman who looked the way he wanted, behaved the way he wanted, existed in the space he designated, on the schedule he approved, surrounded by the people he selected. A woman whose entire world was Elvis, not because she'd freely chosen that, but because he had methodically eliminated every alternative. Here is the detail that should make everything stop. While Elvis was engineering this perfect, controlled companion inside the walls of Graceland, building her, shaping her, monitoring her weight and her hair and her social circle and her ambitions, he was openly, consistently, unapologetically sleeping with other women on the road. Not secretly, not with significant effort to hide it. The Memphis Mafia knew. The hotel staff knew. The women knew about each other. It was simply understood as part of how Elvis operated. He had a life at Graceland and a life on tour, and those two lives had entirely different rules. And Priscilla, locked inside the world he had constructed for her, was supposed to be the stable center he came home to, not his partner in the full sense of the word, his anchor, his safe house, his creation waiting exactly where he left her. She wasn't being prepared for a relationship. She was being prepared for a role. And the cruelest part of that, the part that takes the breath out of the room when you fully understand it, is that she didn't know. She thought she was living a love story. She thought the control was protection. She thought the isolation was intimacy. She thought the construction was devotion. She had no framework for what was actually happening to her, because nobody had ever given her one. He spent 7 years building the perfect woman, and on the day he finally married her, she had no idea she'd been constructed from the ground up to serve a fantasy she never agreed to. May 1, 1967, the Aladdin Hotel, Las Vegas, Nevada. Elvis Presley and Priscilla Beaulieu stood in front of a Nevada Supreme Court justice and got married. 8 minutes. That's how long the ceremony lasted. 8 minutes to make official what Elvis had spent 7 years engineering. The photos are stunning. She's radiant in a white gown with a 6-foot train. He's in a black brocade tuxedo looking every inch the king. The press ate it up. America exhaled. Elvis had finally settled down. The wild years were over. The love story had its happy ending. Except none of that was true, not even close. Because the question nobody asked loudly enough in 1967, and the question that dismantles the entire romantic mythology of this relationship, is devastatingly simple. If Elvis loved Priscilla so much, why did it take him 7 years to marry her? 7 years? Think about what 7 years actually means. She arrived at Graceland at 17. She was 21 by the time he proposed. Those are not the years of a man who was eager, devoted, and counting down the days. Those are the years of a man who was stalling, who was keeping something close without fully committing to it, who was enjoying the benefits of a controlled, devoted companion without accepting the legal and social accountability that came with making her his wife. So what changed in 1967? What finally pushed Elvis Presley, who answered to almost no one, to walk down that aisle? The answer isn't love. The answer is Colonel Tom Parker. Parker had been managing Elvis since 1955. He was not a warm man. He was not a sentimental man. He was a calculating, profit-driven operator who saw Elvis as a product first and a human being somewhere further down the list. And by the mid-1960s, Parker had a problem. The whispers had started. A grown man, one of the most famous in the world, had been keeping a teenage girl at his mansion for years. He'd moved her across an ocean. He controlled her appearance, her social life, her entire existence. And increasingly, people were starting to look at that arrangement and feel uncomfortable about it. Parker understood something Elvis either didn't recognize or didn't care about. Image was the business. Not the music, not the movies, not the live performances. The image, the brand. And the brand of Elvis Presley could not sustain the story that was quietly circulating about a powerful man and a girl he'd acquired at 14. So Parker pushed. He made the case in the language Elvis understood, commercial logic. The marriage needed to happen, not because it was right, not because Elvis was ready, not because Priscilla had spent 7 years patiently earning the life she'd been promised, but because the optics were becoming a liability. And so Elvis proposed. Priscilla has described the proposal in her memoir. She has described the complicated, layered feeling of finally getting what she had been waiting for, what she had restructured her entire life around, what she had sacrificed her independence and her adolescence and her identity to eventually receive. She was relieved. She was happy. She believed in that moment that this was the confirmation she'd needed. That all of it, all the control, all the isolation, all the years of being reshaped and monitored and managed had been leading to this. To legitimacy, to being chosen. She didn't know it was a business decision. The wedding happened, the photos happened, the honeymoon happened, and then almost immediately, with a speed that should have told her everything, nothing changed. The affairs continued, the road life continued, the Memphis Mafia continued. The two separate worlds Elvis had always operated in, Graceland, Priscilla, and everywhere else Elvis, continued exactly as they always had. The wedding ring didn't alter his behavior by a single degree, because it was never meant to. It was optics management. The ring was for the public. His actual life remained entirely his own. But something did change. Something shifted after the wedding that introduced a new and devastating dimension to what Priscilla was living inside. She got pregnant, and in February 1968, 9 months almost to the day after their wedding, she gave birth to Lisa Marie Presley. And Elvis withdrew. Not dramatically, not with a speech or a confrontation or an announced change of policy. He simply withdrew, became less present, more distant. The attention that had once been so focused on Priscilla, so intense it felt like being under a spotlight, began to dim. The calls got shorter. The visits home got more distracted. Something that had existed between them, even if it was always unequal, even if it was always on his terms, evaporated. And Priscilla, sleep-deprived and postpartum, and living in a mansion full of Elvis's people with a newborn and an absent husband, slowly began to understand something she didn't have the words for yet. Multiple accounts, including her own, point to a painful and revealing truth about how Elvis saw women, specifically, how he saw Priscilla after she became a mother. There's a pattern, documented by people who were inside his world, that Elvis struggled to maintain romantic interest in women after they gave birth. That the fantasy he was drawn to, youth, purity, a kind of untouched quality, was incompatible in his mind with motherhood. That the woman he had spent 7 years constructing as his ideal companion had, by becoming the mother of his child, stepped outside the parameters of the fantasy he'd built her to inhabit. She was no longer the girl from the party in Bad Nauheim. She was no longer the project, the creation, the mirror. She was a mother now. A real, complicated, fully human woman with a child and needs and dimensions that exceeded the role he had designed. And Elvis didn't know what to do with that, so he did what powerful men do when reality fails to match their fantasy. He looked elsewhere. The affairs became less discreet. The distance became more permanent. And Priscilla, who had given up her childhood, her adolescence, her identity, her ambitions, and 7 years of her life to become exactly what he asked her to be, found herself alone inside the life she had sacrificed everything to reach. The marriage wasn't the happy ending. It was the moment Priscilla finally understood what she'd actually been living inside. And what she discovered would take her decades to survive. In 1973, Priscilla Presley did something that most people in her position never managed to do. She left, not in a blaze of public drama, not with a press conference or a tell-all interview or a lawyer on speed dial ready to burn everything down. She left quietly, carefully, with the particular kind of deliberateness that belongs to someone who has spent years rehearsing an exit in their own mind before they ever had the courage to walk through the door. She was 27 years old, and in almost every way that mattered, she was starting from zero. Think about what that means. Think about the arithmetic of her life at that moment. She had been with Elvis since she was 14. That means she had spent 13 years, nearly half her entire life, and virtually all of her formative years, inside a world that someone else had built, by someone else's rules, shaped around someone else's needs. She didn't have an adolescence that belonged to her. She didn't have a college experience, a phase of independence, a period of trial and error where she got to figure out who she was through her own choices and her own mistakes. She had Graceland, she had Elvis, she had a role she never auditioned for and a costume she never chose. And now, at 27, with a 5-year-old daughter and a divorce in process, and the eyes of the entire world watching, she had to answer a question that most people get to answer at 17 in the privacy of their own confusion. Who am I? That question for Priscilla wasn't philosophical. It was urgent and practical and in many ways terrifying. Because the honest answer, if she was brave enough to face it, was, I don't fully know, because I was never really allowed to find out. She has spoken about this in interviews across decades. Not always directly, not always with the full weight of what she's describing sitting visibly on her words, but it's there, running underneath if you listen carefully enough. The disorientation of reclaiming an identity that was taken before it fully formed. The strange grief of mourning a relationship that simultaneously gave her everything and robbed her of things she can't fully name, because the robbery happened before she knew what she was supposed to have. And here's where it gets genuinely complicated in a way that tabloids never have the patience to sit with. Because Priscilla didn't leave as a victim who had finally seen the light. She left as a woman who had, over years of quiet internal work, begun to develop a self that existed outside of Elvis. She had started taking karate classes, something she pursued independently, something that was hers. She met someone there. She developed feelings. She began, tentatively and imperfectly, to experiment with being a person who made choices based on her own desires rather than someone else's architecture. And that process, that fragile, early, faltering process of becoming herself, is what Elvis couldn't tolerate. Because the version of Priscilla he had invested in, the version he had built and maintained and kept, was not supposed to develop independent desires. She was not supposed to want things he hadn't approved. She was not supposed to grow in directions he hadn't mapped. When she started to, the marriage was already over in every way except legally. And Priscilla, for perhaps the first time, chose herself. But survival is not the same as recovery, and recovery is not the same as justice. And for Priscilla Presley, all three of those things have had to happen in public, under the scrutiny of millions of people who had a version of her story in their heads before she ever got to tell it herself. Because here is the cultural weight she has carried since 1973, since the moment she became the woman who left Elvis, the woman who divorced the king, the woman who, in the popular imagination, had been given everything and somehow threw it away. That framing is not accidental. That framing is the direct consequence of the fact that the love story, the dangerous, unequal, constructed love story that began when she was 14 years old, had been so successfully romanticized, so thoroughly mythologized, that the public fell in love with it too. America didn't just love Elvis. America loved Elvis and Priscilla, the fairy tale of it. The idea that underneath all the wildness and the fame, there was this girl he'd chosen, this woman he'd come home to, this proof that even the most untamable forces could be anchored by the right love. And so when she left, she didn't just leave a marriage. She disturbed a myth, and myths do not forgive the people who disturb them. She has spent decades being measured against that myth. Her choices, her business decisions, her relationships, her very public role managing Elvis's legacy, filtered always through the lens of the story that was written about her before she was old enough to write her own. People have called her opportunistic, calculating, cold. They have questioned her motives at every turn. They have debated endlessly whether she deserved what she had, whether she earned it, whether she was faithful enough to Elvis's memory, whether her grief was genuine enough, her devotion visible enough, her presence at Graceland justified enough. And underneath all of those debates, the real question, the one that would reframe every single one of them, has gone almost entirely unasked. What did Elvis take from her? Not what did she gain, not what did she inherit or manage or profit from or build after the fact. What did he take? A childhood, an adolescence, the years irreplaceable, unreturnable when a person becomes themselves through their own experience rather than someone else's design. The friendships she didn't make, the choices she didn't have. The version of Priscilla Beaulieu who might have existed if a 24-year-old man with unlimited power had looked across that room in Germany and decided she was too young and walked away. We will never know that woman. She wasn't given the chance to exist. And the most uncomfortable truth of all, the one that says something about all of us, not just about Elvis, is that we built a cultural monument to what he did. We put it in movies. We put it in songs. We made it a symbol of devotion and passion and epic, larger-than-life love. We told every young girl watching that this is what romance looks like. An older man, a powerful man, a man who sees something in you that you don't yet see in yourself, who pulls you out of your ordinary life and into his extraordinary one, who shapes you and guides you and makes you into something more than you were. We called that love. We should have called it a warning. Priscilla survived Elvis. She built a life, a career, an identity on the other side of everything he put her through. And that survival is genuinely remarkable, not because she was rescued, not because someone stepped in and protected her, but because she did it herself, slowly, imperfectly, against the current of a world that preferred the fairy tale to the truth. But surviving something is not the same as that something being acceptable. And the fact that we are still, in 2024, more comfortable with the romance than the reckoning, that says everything about how far we still have to go. If this story made you see Elvis and Priscilla differently, drop a comment below, because this conversation has been 50 years overdue. Share this before it gets buried. Subscribe and hit the notification bell because the stories we were sold as romance